Hey guys, it's Jessica.
And this is Kendra, and you're listening to
Lucid Lab. My week wasn't too crazy. I did try to do a lot with my daughter. We went bowling again and walks and swimming and we played tennis for 2.5 hours.
That's a lot.
Yeah, was a lot. I forgot that my legs are supposed to have muscles, so my thighs hurt.
Was she good at hitting the ball back?
We were pretty good at it. We had tried more than once actually this week, and every time we go, it's packed.
Oh.
I was really upset when we showed up. It was packed again.
Yeah.
She really wants to do it.
To it.
And I saw this one kid at a court and he was just sitting there. So I went up to him and I'm like, are you leaving? Are you alone? And he was waiting for his instructor. So I was like, will you play with my daughter? And so he did. And he really impressed me. He was actually teaching her stuff.
That's cool.
Spent time with her. He was, 16 maybe. It worked out though because someone left a court as we were leaving. So we got to grab it.
And she got a little lesson beforehand. So she was ready to go.
It was fun.
Tennis is a fun sport. I haven't played in a while. I think I like anything with a racket. I really want to try pickleball.
Well, we have that thing that's opening up here. Did you see it?
The chicken and pickle or whatever. I only would be concerned if I ate a bunch of chicken and then tried to play pickleball after. Might not work out so well, but... I have been dealing with some pretty heavy stuff in my personal world that I'm not going to share on here, but that's kind of been taking my focus this week. But I did get out and I took my kiddo to the Renaissance Festival yesterday. It was a really positive time. We had a lot of fun. We ate a lot of really good food. It was super packed out. So I've been going to the Renaissance Festival for 10 years since I've lived in Colorado. Yesterday, we waited over an hour from getting off the interstate to get to the parking lot. Usually that takes about 15 minutes. And then the parking lot was completely full and we had to hike in. Even all the employees that were working were just saying it was more than they'd ever seen. So I don't know if it's just gaining more popularity or what, but they actually ran out of turkey legs, which is a big thing there.
Yeah.
It was really fun and it's beautiful. It's in a part of Colorado down by Castle Rock called Larkspur.
Oh, okay. I didn't know it was that way. I've never been. I do want to go.
And it was only 77 degrees out yesterday. So it was the perfect day.
That's why.
Probably why everybody
was
there.
And knew the weather and they're like, this is the day to go to that.
It was. That's what I've been up to and writing this episode for you guys today, which I am excited to get into. So I'm talking about reincarnation. We've all heard the saying, kids say the darndest things or out of the mouth of babes. Many people kind of laugh about that, but what if we really listen to some of the wild tales or stories that might come out of young children's mouths, especially the ones that say, I've lived a previous life, or I used to be here. I used to live in this town. I used to be a boy. I used to be a girl.
Yeah.
Kids say things like that all the time.
I've seen videos of children having conversations with their parents that are pretty wild.
It's actually very common. We'll talk about some statistics here. Many of them will be able to give some pretty specific details about previous lives, often even describing the way in which they've died.
Wow.
And so on today's episode, we're going to revisit an area that we did during near-death experiences, and that is the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. This is where they do some great work in parapsychology, and we talked about the department that focused on near-death experiences, but there's actually another department there that focuses on reincarnation.
Okay.
And this group of scientists have been studying reincarnation, and they call it CORT, or Cases of Reincarnation Type. They've been researching for over 40 years now. They have collected over 3,000 stories that fit a very specific criteria that focus on reincarnation and previous lives. Their research only focuses on young children because they find that children are the most credible, specifically children under the age of 5, because they can't be swayed easily by culture, parents, news stories. They come up with things that there's no way somebody that young should even know exists.
It makes a lot of sense.
So the work was started by a brilliant man named Ian Stevenson. He is a PhD doctor of psychiatry, and he spent much of his time in Asia. He visited India, Thailand, Nepal, and other areas where reincarnation is taught in their mainstream religions and is an accepted part of their society. When Ian Stevenson retired in 2002, his work was then taken on by a man named Jim B. Tucker. And Jim actually decided to take a different approach. He wanted to focus on areas of the world where reincarnation is not inherent to the culture. Even then, he was able to collect stories from Europe and the Americas. So that, to me, was the most compelling. But I will share stories from both men. I actually, in researching this, read 2 books written by Jim Tucker.
Okay.
So you guys know that I'm always intrigued to research these kinds of spiritual questions.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by near-death experiences, so I was happy to dive in. I've been trying to bring this episode a few times.
Yes,
and it's hard to do these broad topics, and that's why I'm really honing in on the research done by these two men. But before I get too sciencey, I want to start with an overview of what reincarnation is, where the belief started, and then also discuss the religions and groups that continue to preach and believe in the concept today.
Alrighty.
So reincarnation can also be known as rebirth or transmigration. In most beliefs involving reincarnation, the soul of a human being is immortal, and upon death, the soul merely becomes transmigrated into a newborn baby or an animal. Some even believe it can be placed into inanimate objects like plants and trees.
Right.
The word reincarnation derives from a Latin term that literally means entering the flesh again. Discussion of reincarnation appears in the philosophical traditions of ancient India. In Greece, the pre-Socrates discussed reincarnation. It's also been traced back to the Celtic Druids.
Okay.
Very different areas of the world that weren't talking to each other, and all three of them came up with reincarnation.
Yep.
Specific details around how reincarnation works was in some of the traditions known now as Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism.
Okay.
And those would each give specifics, but all three of them would be a little unique in how they approached reincarnation and karma. For example, while all three discuss various virtues that relate to karma, such as nonviolence, being truthful, compassion for all living beings, charity for the poor, and many others like that, Hinduism relied on its foundation assumption that the soul and self exists. So they believe that there was a unique soul, whereas Buddhism believes there is no specific unique soul or self, and that it's all part of one large consciousness.
Okay. Which is always interesting to think about. Am I me, or am I just a tentacle
Of one larger consciousness?
Yeah.
I got into some pretty quantum physics, quantum immortality, some of that while researching this, and I don't think my little brain can handle it.
It's a deep, deep place to go.
Jim Tucker, he's written, I think, like 12 books. He always summarizes at the end, like, his beliefs, and I think he does tend towards that one consciousness. He definitely gave me some things to think about. I was going to try and include some of that in this episode, and it's just... those concepts, I think, might make for a boring episode. I don't know how to really touch them, but...
I mean, there's some topics that I wanted to cover, and I kind of end up in that same...
It's too sciencey, almost. Yeah. Because I, at one point, wanted to do quantum immortality. And when I started researching it, it was too hard to explain. I don't even know that I fully understand it. So how am I going to relay the stories?
That's like me in the multiverse.
Right.
I want to cover that as well. But when you get down into the nitty gritty of it, it's like, this is science, and if it's not something that people are going to sit here and attempt to grasp, it's a waste of an episode. You have to be really motivated to spend time learning about that kind of stuff. To understand it and then have an opinion about it. And I don't think that that's something we can accomplish in an episode. And I think for people who want to know that are going to go look for that specifically from someone who maybe isn't an expert, but has spent a lot more time on it than us Lucid Lab girls.
And they have PhDs and are probably a lot smarter than I am. I know they are.
It's still interesting.
There are some concepts that I just can't even wrap my head around, much less share.
I try, and I know that our reality is not at all what it seems. And we do get sucked up into the everyday bullshit when in reality it is so wild and so complicated and so beyond anything we could ever imagine.
I know. As I'm looking in these rebirth stories, you get into time. And is time linear, or is it this person was born, but the other person's life hasn't really existed? And then they talk about, like, does life or consciousness even exist if somebody's not observing it? Very far out concepts.
I think we brought this up. Maybe it was in your NDE episode. I'm trying to think when. That concept of if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound if no one's there? I don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe nothing for you and I exists exists outside of our peripheral vision, and it's created as we're walking around.
There is also a school of thought that you are the only one who actually exists.
Yeah, and everybody else is just
a figment in your mind or consciousness. Like there's so much that will blow your mind, and
the Matrix.
And it makes me not want to leave my bed. So I can't.
So just have fun. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
That's all we can do.
Reincarnation, there are some really tangible stories out there. I felt like I could bring this. So I want to first talk about Buddhism. So Buddha believed in the existence of an afterlife in another world, but he also believed in reincarnation. Sometimes those don't both exist. The Buddha asserted that karma influences your rebirth and that the cycles of repeated births and deaths are endless. Before the birth of Buddha, ancient Indian scholars had developed competing theories of afterlife, including the materialistic philosophy, which posited that death is the end. No soul, no rebirth, no karma, and they described death to be a state where a living being is completely annihilated. Then Buddha came along and he criticized the materialistic schools that denied that there was anything after death. He said that such beliefs were inappropriate and dangerous.
And boring.
And such annihilationism views would encourage moral irresponsibility and material hedonism.
That makes sense. If you don't have any sort of judgment day,
you'll do whatever the fuck.
You would do whatever you want.
People are doing that anyways.
I know.
Some. Could you imagine a society that had no? Yeah. Thank God Buddha came along. We may not exist today. They may have all killed themselves. He tied moral responsibility to rebirth, which is essentially karma.
And by the way, I do not think that there is a judgment day.
I don't either.
To me, if there's something after this particular life, you want to know that you lived it good. Even if someone's not sitting there with a hammer afterwards, you know?
I think that's why I like the whole idea of karma and rebirth. How you live your life today impacts what your future life could be.
Right. Yep.
I love it.
I think that's what I believe in.
Buddha introduced the concept that there is no permanent self. It's a central concept in Buddhism called anatta. The rebirth cycle continues endlessly, and it is a source of suffering and pain. But this reincarnation and cycle can be stopped through enlightenment to nirvana.
Right.
So once a soul reaches nirvana, it is taken out of the soul cycle.
I think too, and you probably are going to come to this, is I'm not decided on whether or not it's automatic or we have a choice. And I think we do have a choice.
I can't wait when we get into some of the stories. We do have children, when they're talking about their past lives, also telling their parents or whoever's listening about what happens in between lives.
Okay.
So hold that thought, because I think I kind of agree with you. The Theravada Buddhists assert that rebirth is immediate. So as soon as the soul dies, it's reborn. While the Tibetan and most Chinese and Japanese schools hold to the notion of something they call a bardo, or an intermediate state that can last up to 49 days, where the soul is kind of in that.
Right.
I guess Christians call it purgatory, limbo, whatever you want to call it.
We covered that a bit on the Aokigahara Forest episode.
Yeah. Even within the same religion, essentially, of Buddhism, there are different ideas around it.
Right.
I guess that's just every religion, because people interpret things differently.
Yep.
The bardo rebirth concept of Tibetan Buddhism is what developed in India and spread to Tibet and other Buddhist countries. And it involves 42 peaceful deities and 58 wrathful deities. And these ideas would lead to maps on karma and very detailed charts that you can see that talks about how rebirth happens, what form it can take, and it is discussed in texts such as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So if you really want to get into karma and rebirth, there is some pretty specific things out there in the Buddhist religion.
Okay.
The major Buddhist traditions accept that the reincarnation of a being depends on their past karma and the merit or demerits they accumulated. So if you were good in life, you rebirth into something better. And if you were bad in life, you, I guess, take a level down.
You said it's endless, right? So there's no reaching.
Oh, well, they believe in nirvana.
Okay.
That's when the soul is released. And that's the whole level of enlightenment. And that's all mapped out in this.
Watch, there's 2 people up there. Just kidding.
I know. I think they believe Buddha's up there.
All the gods are just sitting up there. And they're all laughing at us because we can't reach it.
Probably. The Buddhists also believe that there are 6 realms of existence in which the rebirth may occur. I didn't go deep into that. I don't know what that means. Does that mean you can be born into different worlds, or is it just different realms like animals, people?
Oh, yeah.
Tibetan Buddhism stresses also the state of mind at the time of your death. They believe that if you die with a peaceful mind, it will result in a fortunate rebirth. And if you die in a disturbed state of any kind, it would lead to an unfortunate rebirth.
Well, that's unlucky.
What if you die like
when you're
a tragic?
murdered?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that sucks. Which is like the Yuri. If they tragically die, they're stuck in that limbo or whatever it is until someone can come and help release them.
Yeah. In the Hindu tradition, they believe that the body dies, but the soul does not. And the soul is indestructible and you are at bliss. So they don't believe it's like a struggle like the Buddhists believe.
Okay.
Your current karma impacts your future forms and realms of lives. Good intent and actions lead to a good future. Bad intent and actions lead to a bad future.
Yep.
There is no permanent heaven or hell in most Hinduism sects. In the afterlife, based on one's karma, the soul is reborn as another being in heaven, hell, or a living being on earth. So they believe not all reincarnation comes back to the planet we live on now. Some of it happens in heaven or hell. Hindus also believe that gods die once their karmic merit runs out, as do those who live in hell, and they continue to recycle and get another chance to come back to earth as humans or animals if they want to.
That's getting too complicated for me.
I know.
That's too much.
They believe reincarnation continues endlessly in cycles until they become self-aware, and that is when they gain something that they call moksha. So that's like their version of nirvana. There was an Indian philosopher in the 20th century that said rebirth in the Hindu religion was the mechanism of evolution. So he believed and taught that plants would be reborn as animals, animals would be reborn as humans, and each time you went through the reincarnation, you would gain a level of intelligence. This progression was irreversible, and he didn't believe that like a human would go back and be reborn as an animal. So he thought you were always progressing.
Okay.
And I guess the next progression would be from human to God or to one of those other spiritual beings in heaven or hell. Or you could just keep coming back as a human, but you would never go backwards.
I don't know what I believe when it comes to the animal stuff.
I don't either, but I will have a case that talks about animals. I did also come across Jainism. I am not going to go deep into this one. It is another Indian sect similar to Hinduism.
Okay.
I didn't know much about this religion, but while they do believe in karma and reincarnation, Jainism doesn't really believe in like central gods. They said that God has no role playing in an individual's destiny. It's all about your personal choices, and they really highlight living a just life, lots of meditation, focusing on karma as a way to rebirth and move up. So they don't believe in like them being like a god who judges you.
Okay.
They also believe in individual souls, and each soul is responsible for its own situation and its own salvation.
But without God.
Yeah, I guess that's how they differ from Hinduism. So they don't believe in all the deities.
Okay.
Christianity typically does not believe in reincarnation, but there was a survey back in 2009, and they asked Christians how they felt about reincarnation, and 22% of those who identified as Christians in America expressed a belief in it, and 31% of regular church-going European Catholics also expressed a belief in it.
Interesting.
And the Roman Catholic Church is the main proponent of reincarnation not existing.
Right.
They actually argue that reincarnation is unorthodox. There is evidence that there was a man named Origen, which is a really good name for this. He was an early Christian theologian.
I am God.
And supposedly this is like a conspiracy theory out there that he taught reincarnation in his lifetime, but when his works were translated into Latin, they left those parts out.
Oh, convenient.
Mm-hmm. Supposedly there is a passage that came from Origen that somehow somebody snuck away and wrote down. And he essentially said that the souls are just clothed with the body. And then when the fallen souls come out of those bodies, they lift themselves up to better experiences until those bodies are annihilated again. He also said that souls are ever vanishing and ever reappearing. That's me ad-libbing because it's a really long passage and some really hard to read English. But this original text that he wrote, it was called On First Principles, almost completely disappeared. But there is proof that perhaps Christianity was started with reincarnation beliefs as well.
Oh, yeah.
I don't trust anything that we have.
I don't trust anything.
I'm just thinking, why would the Catholic Church not want reincarnation to exist? They got to keep everybody afraid. Mm-hmm. So if people thought there was the possibility to reincarnate for being a good person in this life, they're not going to give the money to the church. Mm-hmm. I guess conform to everything that they want them to.
Yeah.
So to me, this isn't that far of a reach.
No.
In fact, it's probably the truth.
Right. Yeah.
Judaism does not believe as a whole in reincarnation, but the Jewish sect of Kabbalah that started in the 12th century did believe in reincarnation. Kabbalah taught that the soul of Moses is reincarnated in every generation. Reincarnation is an expression of divine compassion. They call it something that I can't pronounce. Jilgul, I don't know. He believed in this divine soul and that it had a divine spark. He believed that even a stone or a leaf of a tree possesses such a soul.
Oh, wow.
Kabbalah was actually a man, by the way. I keep saying Kabbalah. I can't pronounce his first name very well either. It's Lurianic Kabbalah. So
okay.
He was a Jewish philosopher that came about in the 12th century and started teaching this like more mystical side of Judaism.
Okay.
But he taught that a human soul could occasionally be exiled into lower inanimate, vegetative, or animal creations.
Potatoes.
He also believed in different components of the soul, and each Jewish soul would be reincarnated in order to fulfill 613 Mosaic commandments, and that would elevate that particular spark to the holiness level, and then they would transition to becoming a Messiah. And the last religion I want to touch on, because it's another one of the big ones, is Islam. So most Islamic schools of thought reject any idea of reincarnation of living beings. It teaches a linear concept of life wherein a human being only has one life, and upon death, he or she is judged by God. Then they are either rewarded in heaven or punished in hell.
Seems like such a waste.
It's very black and white.
Yeah.
I didn't find any instances where there were like break-offs in the Islam religion where they believe in reincarnation. I did see that there are parts of like Lebanon, I believe, and some other countries that are seen as Islamic nations that do have kind of more of the native tribe religions where they do believe in reincarnation. Other religions and groups that teach reincarnation as part of their belief systems that I'm not covering in detail would include Scientology, Wicca, Sikhism, and many native tribes across the world.
Why did you include Scientology? That's not a religion.
I said religion or groups.
Oh, sorry.
There's a lot of groups out there that I didn't include, but I knew Scientology people are familiar with, and they do teach reincarnation, I think, to other planets.
That's cool, though.
To other planets.
I'm not going to pay people at Scientology to believe in that, though.
I'm not paying anyone to tell me what's going to happen to me when I die. So now I want to jump into the science stuff, because there's really no way to scientifically prove that reincarnation exists. But Ian and Jim kind of found a way to science-fy it the most that you can.
Science-fy it?
Science-fy it. It is all grouped under the academic name of parapsychology, which some scientists would say is pseudoscience. Mm-hmm. Ian Stevenson was actually the founder and director of the University of Virginia's School of Medicine's Division of Perceptual Studies. So he started the whole shebang.
Okay.
He was doing this back in the 1960s and 1970s. He was inspired to do this as he was working in the psychiatry field, mostly with children. He kept coming across cases where children would have phobias or unusual abilities, and they couldn't fully be explained by genetics or the environment that they lived in. And that's when he became inspired to start looking at other factors. Reincarnation might possibly provide another contributing factor to why children would just be afraid of certain things or have erratic behaviors that just didn't fit with anything in their environment.
This makes me wonder if reincarnation is real. Is there ever a brand new soul?
Yeah, where would it come from?
Or have we existed for all time?
Well, if you believe in the evolution part of it, it would be a brand new soul to the human existence, right? And maybe that's why some of these serial killers exist, because they just transitioned from being a tiger.
Oh, well, okay. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like where did the soul come from?
Right, exactly.
That's a whole nother cosmic.
Do souls have babies?
I don't know.
My brain is just picturing like one blob, like rolling into another blob, and like a little blob comes out of it.
I don't know.
Or two sparks. Psh. I'm just wondering.
And that just goes back to where did we all come from to begin with?
I know.
Because even if you believe in like one consciousness and we're all like little tentacles of that, where did that one consciousness come from? Who created it? How did it like
No,
come to
because
be?
we can never get to that point. We don't know anything.
Our brains can't go there because we're not meant to.
Yeah, I think that's the point of life. What's the purpose of anything?
Why are we even here? Why are we doing this podcast? Why am I talking about reincarnation? We're going to go like roll into a ball on the floor now.
Yeah. Goodbye. I'll say the purpose is love. Isn't that what we came to?
I think it's what it always comes back to. That's where we came back to with the near-death experiences.
Yep.
I don't think we'll get to like that overall just love in the reincarnation side of it, but I think we'll talk about what we've said. Maybe you choose if you want to come back to earth or go up into the heavenly realm where it's just all love and light.
And maybe you don't have to make a choice right away. Maybe you get to stay up there for what we would consider like 1,000 years time. And you're like, I think I'll take a dip back down.
Mm-hmm. And that's what the Hindus believe. That's sometimes gods get tired of being gods and they want to come back down and live in a provincial life.
It just reminds me of movies where there's like a rich person. They're like, I want to go be regular for a little bit.
And maybe we do choose that. Maybe our souls are like, I want to go live in this time frame and live as this person. So back to Ian Stevenson, he's running into all these kids that had these idiosyncrasies and he's trying to figure out why. He decided to jump full into reincarnation and that became all of his work. He has written over 300 papers and 14 books, and I really appreciate how he approached it because he was very cautious. He emphasized that the information he collected only suggests that reincarnation is possible, but there's no definitive proof that it occurs. He just wanted to get as much evidence as he possibly could, and so he went out into the field for most of his work, traveling all over mostly Asia, like I mentioned earlier, and just collecting these stories, visiting with the families, and he put together what he saw as the typical features that came out of these reports.
Now that's a life purpose.
Yeah,
People who can,
I'm like jealous of these guys. Like this seems like such meaningful work.
Right.
So what he found were these typical features. Number one, it would start at an age between 2 and 4, and the child would just spontaneously begin talking about it.
Okay.
Like as soon as they started talking, some of them, they're like, oh, by the way, I was this person.
My name is Amy.
Exactly. The child would speak increasingly about it. They'd be like nonstop, and they would have greater clarity until they reached the age of 6, and then it would kind of just drop off.
Okay.
So you have this window, and that's what he found, is that you really needed to get to where these children were, because after age 6, the memories just start fading.
Okay.
And by the age of 8, the child will generally completely stop talking about it altogether and maybe not even remember what they had said before. The child would show behavior unexpected for them, but consistent with the behavior of the person who died. For example, the child may have a fear of water for no reason or have special interests in something that children wouldn't be interested in to begin with. Or they might have appetites for foods that don't make sense for the family. They want something that the family's never made before.
Right.
One of the kids asked for meatloaf and his mom had never made meatloaf and nobody in their like culture had eaten it before.
Okay.
In many cases, the child may have a birthmark or congenital birth defect whose location and appearance correspond with wounds on the body of the previous person. These get really interesting, and I will have some examples.
Heard about that.
A high number of children, when they are alluding to their past life, bring up a violent end. Most reincarnation stories that Ian and Jim come across involve somebody who died tragically.
Okay. Like a car crash or murder or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, unexpectedly. Their life was cut short.
Okay.
And so therefore they wanted to come back. In some cultures, the previous person before dying will predict his or her next life. So there are stories of this person saying, I am going to come back. Here's how you'll know it's me. And in, I think it was Thailand, they would even put marks on the dead body to see if when they reincarnated, those marks would be shown on that new person. So they would know to look for that. And there's some really curious stories there. The previous person may also appear in a dream to the pregnant mother announcing that they were going to be born to them. So you're pregnant and you have a dream from your dad or your uncle or something, and they're like, I'm coming back to you.
Okay.
So that's reported in quite a few of the cases that they found as well.
Right.
After the age of 10, the child will continue to develop normally. They will forget all the memories and they'll just be the new self that they are.
Okay.
So those are like the 7 things that he saw a pattern in when he started collecting the stories. What makes his cases noteworthy is that he reported in many of the cases that what the children said could be corroborated back with family members of the deceased.
Right.
Many times the children will go back to their previous home, either to visit or meet the relatives. They will speak of their previous lives as if it's from their own memories. So it's not something like hard for them to recall.
That would be so wild to have, let's say, your parent come to you as a child. Oh my God, I would cry.
Ian Stevenson's cases were incredibly detailed. He wanted to approach it from a scientific lens and really capture everything. And they opened this forum. It was back in the 60s and 70s, so it was probably a phone line at the time, but now it's on the internet where parents could write in if they had children that were speaking about previous lives. And then they would choose based on these certain criteria if they would go and engage with those families or if it was too far out there. So I say all this to say they have credibility. So any of these stories I'm about to share, they were fully researched. This isn't just some like BS.
Well, and it's similar to the NDEs, right?
Yes.
Like they have their criteria as to what they consider that as well. I think you went over that in that episode.
And so when Stevenson stepped down, Jim Tucker took over. The director of the Division of Perceptual Studies that stepped in at the time was actually Bruce Grayson, which was the man that I mentioned in the near-death experience episode. It's all coming together here. Now, Jim Tucker was also a doctor of psychiatry working with children for 9 years. He said he felt unfulfilled by his work and was open to the idea that humans are more than just their material bodies. He was drawn to Ian Stevenson's research. He had been raised as a strict Southern Baptist, so this was kind of outside of his, I guess, learnings in life, but he was just pulled in and he started taking over this work.
Okay. Unfulfilled, but inspired.
Yes. 70% of the cases that they collected of children claiming to have past lives all said that the person had died from an unnatural cause.
Okay.
So he concluded that the traumatic death may be why the self survived. Whereas other people, when they just pass, like the soul passes peacefully, it goes back into the consciousness and there's no reason to bring that back to the earth when it's reborn. But if somebody dies in a traumatic way, they're still holding on to themselves because they want to tell their story. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
Yes, but then why do ghosts exist?
He talks some about that in one of his books.
Okay.
About like what's the difference. And yeah, some maybe get trapped and don't get out.
What about demons? Explain it all, Kendra.
I can't. That's when you reincarnate down to hell. Okay. I don't know. He also found that the average time between death and when that person would show back up in a newborn child was about 16 months.
Whoa.
So rebirth cycles seem to be pretty quick. He developed something that he called the strength of case scale, which would evaluate the cases that came to him. He gives it a scale of how like credible it is based on 4 things. One of them is whether it involves birthmarks or defects that correspond to the previous life. The strength of the statements about the previous life. So he would have parents write down every statement. And then when he was able to travel out and meet the children, he would check off which ones were true and which ones weren't. And that would go into the score of how credible it was.
Okay.
He would also pay attention to the behaviors and how they relate to the previous life, because that's not something that kids can really fake.
Right.
Number 4 would be if they could trace back a connection to an actual person who existed, because kids would sometimes say things about previous lives, but they could never find who that person was. So if they were able to then find, of course, that makes it more credible. So those are the 4 pieces that I used when I chose what stories I'm going to share.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, this was something else that I thought was not what I would have, I guess, considered, is that most children reporting previous lives, they came from a similar culture. So you don't have a child in India saying that he used to be a person in Mexico.
Oh.
They usually live in the same country and it's usually not that far away.
At least in this regard, right? It's kind of disappointing. And I said disappointed, but it makes more sense because if they're in a, they die in this traumatic way and they're ready to come back and it's really quick, it makes more sense that the soul would stay close to home.
Yeah,
so
true.
Even though I said it's disappointing, it's because I'm like, well, if I come back, I'd like to go do something different.
But remember, if you die in a peaceful way, you could come back anywhere, probably.
Right, that's true.
So I think that's why I want to delineate this. The cases that I'm choosing to share on this episode are scientific. Okay. Those are interesting to me because there's no way you can kind of write these off.
Right. But it definitely makes sense. They're going to want to be close to home.
Yes.
Find a way back to their family.
The other thing is that most of them will come back as the same gender. So if they died as a woman, they would come back in a girl baby.
Interesting.
That isn't always the case. There are times where it's like cross-gendered, but it was 90% of the cases were the same sex.
Okay.
And then 70% of the cases were men or male children. So it's predominantly more
because women are more at peace with dying.
Maybe. Or men die in tragic ways more often.
Yeah.
And Jim does bring up that most people think of reincarnation. We hear adults speak of their previous lives. He kind of throws it out when adults are saying they were hypnotized and that they remember being like an ancient Egyptian princess or something. I mean,
because they always go there. Like I had a past life regression thing. And it was a very normal, scary experience. Like what actually happened, I wouldn't say on here, but I was just a normal person. Like
that's more realistic.
Right.
But all these people who are like, oh, I was Napoleon or I was Hitler or I was some famous Elvis. I don't know.
People always say that.
He mentioned it. He's like, how many people are famous in the world? Like of all the people who live on this world, probably like 1%. Most adults will come back with that. And he was like, if you really paid attention and thought those were credible, that means that Queen of England, for example, has reincarnated like 5,000 times or something.
The only time I would maybe believe something like that is if another star says, hey, I feel like I'm the reincarnation of so-and-so, and they have the same skills.
Right.
And they're both famous.
Yeah.
And they sound the same, or like they have the same quirks or something like that.
And I will have one example of a child that says they were a famous person, and it's very credible.
Interesting.
I didn't include another one. There was one that you mentioned that, and their child at age 2 started wanting to golf, and their family never golfed. And the kid is like a golf phenom, and he claimed that he was some famous golfer from like the 1950s. And that one was really credible because yes, that's like an unusual talent that your child is just born with that seemingly comes from nowhere. And then they say they have a previous life too. That's when it to me makes sense. But once again, that's a child doing that. I don't believe an adult as much.
And children,
they're genuine. And while there might be parents who are trying to capitalize on it, from what I saw in the cases I'm about to share, like the parents didn't even want to be known. Many of them were Christian because he focused in America, Jim did, and they were embarrassed. Like they asked for their names to be concealed because they were afraid of what the townspeople would think of them. And that always to me gives credibility too. They're not just trying to write a book and make money.
So that also makes me wonder, it's not all day long. Like it's still their child. Their child still reacts with them. It's just these like kind of weird lucid moments that they're having.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It'll make sense when I get into
that would
stories.
be hard for a parent.
Yeah. If your child's like,
you're like, no, your name is not Bob and you are not 40 years old. Stop it.
And he's like, can I smoke a cigar? And you're like, no, you're 3.
Give me that teat, mom.
Or he's like hitting on like grown women. Like your 3-year-old's like, hey, toots.
She walks by and there's this little 2-year-old hand that
smacks her ass. He's like, get in the kitchen and make me a sandwich.
Make me some meatloaf.
So now that I've kind of set the stage about reincarnation and the studies done behind it, I'm going to go into sharing some of these stories. So the first story I want to share is a woman named Doreen, and her father, John McConnell, was a retired New York City policeman working as a security guard. One night in 1992, on his way home from work, he stopped at an electronics store and found himself in the midst of a robbery. And being that he was ex-police and a security guard, he happened to have a gun on him, and he pulled it out thinking that would help the situation. But the robbers turned on him and shot him 6 times, killing him.
Oh, wow.
One of the bullets went through his left lung, his right heart ventricle, and the main pulmonary artery.
Okay.
Doreen had been very close with her father, and she said she remembers him always telling her, no matter what, I'm always going to take care of you.
Right.
5 years after her father passed away, Doreen gave birth to a little boy that she named William. He began passing out right after birth, and they diagnosed him with pulmonary valve atresia, which is when the valve of the pulmonary artery has not been fully formed, so blood cannot travel through it properly to the lungs. In addition, William's right heart ventricle had not formed properly.
Interesting.
He underwent several surgeries, and with medication, he was doing pretty well. Babies are able to recover from birth defects like this.
Okay.
Around the age of 3, William's mom was working from home and just trying to get things done, and her little 3-year-old kept acting up like toddlers do. And she told him, go sit down or I'm going to spank you.
Oh.
William looked at her and said, "When you were a little girl and I was your daddy, you were bad lots of times and I never hit you."
Oh. Whoa.
Doreen was like taken aback. Like,
yeah.
I can't imagine my 3-year-old saying something like that.
Right.
That was the first time she remembered him saying something that really struck her.
Okay.
But in the coming weeks, he would say other things. He started talking about his previous life quite often and telling her that he was her dad. And he would even give details about the situation of the robbery when he was shot that had not been in police reports and nobody would know.
Wow.
One day, Doreen recalled a conversation where William said, "When you were little and I was your daddy, what was my cat's name?" And she said, "Maniac." And he said, "No, not that one, the white one." And Doreen said, "You mean Boston?" William said, "Yeah, that one. I used to call him Boss, right?" That was correct. The family did have 2 cats when she was a child. And she said only her dad, John, ever referred to the white cat as Boss instead of his full name, Boston. And she's like, how would he have possibly known that?
Yeah.
One day, Doreen asked William if he remembered anything about the time before he was born as her baby. He told her he died on a Thursday night and went to heaven. He saw God, talked to God. He saw lots of animals there. He says he told God he was ready to come back to Earth, and then he was born on a Tuesday morning. Doreen was shocked that he mentioned days so casually. He was only 3.5 years old and was not old enough to have really learned days of the week.
Yeah, that's true. Even into kindergarten, they're teaching them that
They don't know what day.
Right.
And she said on top of that, what he said was accurate. Her father had died on a Thursday night and William had been born on a Tuesday morning.
Right. You rarely think of days. We just go to dates.
Right.
Yeah.
He also told her when you die, you don't go right to heaven. He told her you go to different levels, which is really interesting. And he said that animals are reborn as humans and that there are many animals in heaven and they don't bite or scratch. Her father, John, had been a practicing Roman Catholic before his death, but he did believe in reincarnation. And she said he always talked about wanting to take care of animals in his next life.
Well, what if his version of heaven was different from another soul's version of heaven?
Right, if he liked animals so much. Mm-hmm. But she says William, her son, often tells her that when he grows up, he wants to be a veterinarian that works at the zoo to take care of animals.
Okay.
The other thing that she said really confirmed that William actually was her father is that her son would often say to her, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of you."
Oh,
so that's a sweet story.
That's sweet. I mean, it would be totally different if it wasn't someone you know, which I know you're probably going to go into. When it's your dad, what if you never know when he's not going to say something to you again, and then it's just your son?
And that would, I assume, happen. I didn't see what happened once he turned. I would think at 6 or 10, he's gone.
Bittersweet moment, and you realize you haven't heard from your dad, and that's it. Even though you already grieved him 5 years before that.
I think in this situation, the dad felt like his time wasn't done.
Yeah.
And he came back to give closure with Doreen, his daughter that he was closest to. So the next story happened in Thailand in 1967. It was a little boy named Shanai. He was born with 2 birthmarks, one on the back of his head and one above his left eye. When he was 3 years old, he began speaking of a previous life. He said he had been a school teacher named Buakai and that he had been shot and killed on his way to school.
In the head.
He gave the names of his parents, his wife, and the 2 children he had with her. He kept begging his grandma, whom he lived with, to take him to his previous parents' home in a place called Kaufra, which was about 15 miles away from their home village. His grandma, because of his insistent asking, finally put him on a bus and went with him to visit this town. Once they got off the bus, Shanai led his grandma to a small house which belonged to an elderly couple, and they confirmed that yes, they had a son named Buakai. Lanak was his last name, and that he had been a teacher and he had been murdered 5 years ago.
Okay, so remember in the beginning you said that he was finding that the most consistent amount of time between death and rebirth was 16 months. These have both been 5 years.
No, because the child's 3 when they're telling their parents.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So I had that exact same.
You're like, wait a second, the
and
math
then I'm like,
isn't
oh wait,
mathing.
I'm like, the child's telling them this at like 3. So
okay, so hopefully it helps some of you too.
Yes, the math is mathing. They tested the little boy by asking him to pick out Buakai's belongings from others in their home, which he immediately went and picked out things that belonged to their son. He also recognized one of Buakai's daughters in a picture, and then he proceeded to ask where the other one was by her correct name.
Oh, wow.
The family at that time accepted that it was their son, reincarnated, and Shania must be that soul. It was even said that when the daughters did come around, because they brought all the family and his wife, he told the girls that they were to call him father, and if they didn't, he would get upset. So he still wanted them to have manners.
Listen, I know I'm 3 feet tall.
Can you imagine a little 3-year-old and you're like, yes, father? I don't know how old his daughters were. I'm assuming probably like 15 or something. As for the details on Buakai's death, there was no autopsy report, but his wife and family were able to say that the doctor who examined him at death said that the bullet had entered through the back of Buakai's head and exited through his forehead.
Okay.
These match Shania's birthmarks, even in the size, as the one on the back of his head was smaller and the one toward his left eye was much larger, like the path of the bullet.
Okay.
Also, the one on the back of his head, no hair grew in it.
Oh.
And they said both of the birthmarks had a puckered appearance, similar to a bullet wound.
That's wild. What if you're decapitated? I'm just kidding. I'm getting dark now.
You have
a line across your neck.
You don't reincarnate. I don't know.
Ooh, yeah. What if there's rules?
There probably are. Now, this one I found very interesting because it is not common for children to recall being an animal in a past life.
Yeah.
But he did come across a few during his research, and this one was the most intriguing to me.
Do they just start purring?
This one was a young boy from Thailand named Dalawong. He was 3 years old, and an acquaintance of his father, Mr. Hugh, came over to the house for the first time. The little boy had never met the man, but he started going into detail and telling his dad not to trust the man because Mr. Hugh, who was a hunter, had killed him in a cave in a previous life.
Oh.
He was a snake.
Oh.
The 3-year-old provided an accurate account of how the snake had been cornered by Mr. Hugh and his 2 dogs before killing the snake and cooking him for food. He even described how one of the friends with Mr. Hugh had eaten the piece of snake. And this was a fact that both of those men were later able to verify.
Whoa.
So that one's really interesting.
A snake.
Dalawong believed he had lived his previous life as that snake. And he even suffered from a rare skin condition that covered his lower body in dry skin that could be seen as snake-like.
Oh, I mean, doesn't almost every animal meet an unfortunate, untimely death?
Yeah. And then they become humans. All of us could
so we're
have
just
been
a bunch
animal.
of animals. We're just a bunch of animals.
Okay, what animal would you have wanted to be in a previous life?
Well, I think a bird. I want to fly.
Yeah. I wonder if that's what like contributes to some of our like talents or personalities, is like what animal we could have been before we were human form.
I mean, or a cat.
I'd love to be a cat in a really well taken care of home.
Right. I want to be a bougie cat.
I don't want to be a stray cat.
I wouldn't mind being like just a pretty little singing bird.
I think being like a fish or something would be cool, living in the water. I can't swim, so I definitely wasn't a fish in a previous life.
No, you weren't.
There were a couple other examples, but I thought that one was interesting because they were able to confirm how the snake died. It was also said that Dalawong later in life began killing snakes because he said that his life as a snake had been miserable existence, and he felt sorry for snakes and wanted to put them out of their misery so that they could reincarnate to be something better.
Oh.
So he became a snake serial killer, which isn't a good ending. The next case I want to cover is James Linegar, and this is probably one of the more famous ones. I've heard this on quite a few podcasts, but I did want to share it because it's pretty interesting. And it was an American boy. He was born in 1998. The family moved around quite a bit and ended up in Louisiana. And it was at this time, the parents say somewhere between the age of 2 and 3, that he began saying that he had memories of a previous life. This family did reach out pretty quickly to Jim Tucker because this is in the 90s when that research was more well known, and they began documenting things. They said it all began around when James was 22 months old, and his father took him to the James Cavanaugh Flight Museum in Dallas, Texas. And they said he was transfixed by the sight of the World War II planes. And at the end of the visit, he was crying because he didn't want to leave.
Okay.
They were passing by a toy shop when James was around 2 years old, and she pulled out a little propeller plane and handed it to James and said, "Look, there's even a little bomb underneath it." And he looked at his mom and he said, "That's not a bomb, Mommy. That's a drop tank."
Oh.
Talking about this with her husband later, she learned that a drop tank is an extra fuel tank fitted to an aircraft to extend its range. But why would a 2-year-old know that?
Yeah.
Shortly after turning 2, James began having nightmares as often as 5 times a week, in which he would scream and kick his legs in the air, crying, "Airplane crash, plane on fire."
Oh.
He kept saying, "Little man can't get out."
Oh.
At around 28 months, he told his parents the little man was himself and that his plane had been shot down by the Japanese. He said his name had been James. He had flown a Corsair and he had flown from a boat whose name he gave as Natoma. Over the next 3 months, he also added that he had a friend, a fellow pilot named Jack Larson, and that he had been shot down near Iwo Jima. When he would play with his planes, James would crash his toy planes into furniture, breaking off the propellers. He would also reenact scenes from World War II with planes burning and crashing, bullets and bombs exploding all around, like pretty dark stuff for a 2-year-old to be reenacting. And he had never watched any World War II like movies. He had been to the museum. That was really all that his parents had known of him being exposed. He also began naming his toy planes, and he would call the American aircraft Wildcats and Corsairs, and he would refer to the Japanese planes as Zeeks and Bettys. And he explained to his mom that they used boys' names for fighter planes and girls' names for bomber planes.
Oh,
which is correct.
Yeah.
She also said every time she would put her son in his car seat in the back of the car, he would often mime putting on headgear.
Oh.
Like he was getting into a plane.
That's cute.
James's parents were devout Christians and they did not believe in reincarnation.
Oh.
But all of these things were happening and they decided to take it upon themselves just to research and see if some of the things that James had been saying they could find information on. While searching the internet, they discovered that the USS Natoma Bay was an aircraft carrier that served in the Pacific in World War II and taking part in the Iwo Jima operation. And he was also able to find that there was a pilot named Jack Larson, which was who he said was his friend.
Right.
He then began to approach Natoma Bay veterans who were happy to talk about their time. They were able to find out that Jack Larson did exist. They also came across a man named James McReady, Houston, that everyone seemed to know. He was from Pennsylvania and he had been killed near Iwo Jima at the age of 21 when his plane was shot down.
That's quite the jump from World War II to 1998.
Yeah. So while the average is 16 months, there's some that are going to be anomalies in anything. So this is a soul that's set up in heaven maybe longer. And there's no connection between the families, as we'll find out. They were able to track down James Houston's sister. Her name was Ann Barron. And they took their son to speak with her. And he described how his plane had been shot down. He said it had been hit in the engine, which caused the plane to explode into a ball of fire. And that was why he kept having those nightmares of burning and being trapped inside. Ann Barron, John Houston's sister, was able to corroborate that that is how her brother's plane had been shot down.
Okay.
They had a reunion of the Natoma Bay pilots and James' family took him there. And while he was there, he recognized one of them, Bob Greenwalt, by his voice, and he called him out by name, which was odd.
Oh, whoa.
Ann Barron was also able to confirm that some of the private details of their family that the young boy James said were true, including problems caused by their father's alcoholism. How would he have known that?
Right.
After speaking with James and hearing the details that he shared, she was convinced that it was her brother reborn. The Linningers did ask their son James if he remembered anything before he was born. He said he remembered choosing the Linningers specifically as his parents. His parents gave him 3 G.I. Joes and he named them Billy, Walter, and Leon. And they said, "Where'd you come up with those names?" And he said, "Those are the 3 men that I met when I got to heaven."
Oh.
The parents later learned that the 3 squadron mates of Houston who had been killed right before his plane was shot down had been named Billy Peeler, Walter Devlin, and Leon Connor.
Oh.
So apparently they all saw each other in heaven.
Yeah.
So that's the story of James Lineker.
Wow.
I actually saw an interview with James Lineker. He's now I think 18 or 19, and he's embarrassed to even talk about.
Yeah. Becoming famous for something he can't even remember.
Yeah, because there was a book, I believe, written about his case and maybe showed up on a few series when he was a child. I don't know that you should put your child on there, honestly.
Yeah. And everybody's still talking about him.
Mm-hmm. He's like, I just want to live my life. Now I just want to be a boring guy living in the Midwest.
I don't want to be interviewed.
So there was another little girl. We've talked about a few boys. Let's talk about Purnima. She was in Sri Lanka, and she was born with a group of light-colored birthmarks over the left side of her chest and her lower ribs. When she was around 2.5 years old, she began speaking of her previous life. Around age 4, she saw a TV program about the Kilanaya Temple, which was a well-known temple that was about 145 miles away from where she lived. She told her parents she recognized it from her previous life. Now, her parents happened to be, her dad was a principal and her mother was a teacher, and they took a field trip to this temple. And while there, she told her parents that she had lived on the other side of the river that flowed right next to the temple. By age of 6, Purnima had made about 20 different statements about her previous life, and her parents were writing them all down. She described being a man, so this is a cross-gender one. Okay. She said she was an incense maker that was killed in a traffic accident.
Okay.
She mentioned 2 incense brands, Ambiga and Gita Pichka. Her parents had never heard of those brands, and the doctors researching the case confirmed that they were not sold anywhere in their town for her to have come across.
Okay, like burning incense?
I think it's kind of perfume.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Purnima's dad had a teacher that worked at the school with family back in Kalanaya, and he began sharing the statements that his daughter made to see if they could research who it might be. And they came across 3 small families that owned incense businesses. The owner of one of them called his brands Ambiga and Geta Pichka. His brother-in-law, Janadasa Pereira, had been killed by a bus when he was taking incense sticks. So incense sticks.
Yeah, burning incense. Yeah.
He was taking incense sticks to the market, and it had happened 2 years before Purnima had been born.
Okay.
So Purnima's family went to visit the owner with her, and while there, she made several statements about family members and specifics about their business that were all correct.
Wow.
The family accepted that she was in fact a reincarnation of their brother-in-law. Of the 20 statements that Purnima's parents had recorded, 14 of them were verified by the living relatives to be true.
Wow.
Additionally, they were able to obtain Janadasa's autopsy report, and it showed fractured ribs on the left side of his body, a ruptured spleen, and abrasions running diagonally from the right shoulder across the chest to the lower left abdomen. These injuries corresponded to Purnima's birthmark across her chest and left ribs.
Oh, okay.
So the next story I have is Kumkum Verma. She was a girl in India, and at the age of 3.5, she began speaking of a previous life, saying she had lived in Darbhanga, a city of 200,000 people that was about 25 miles away from her village. She said that Urdu Bazaar was the name of the section of the city where she lived, an area full of artisans, craftsmen, and owners of small businesses. She was from a family of a wealthier class, being that her father was a respected doctor and they owned land. Her speaking of this common area of a big city was not something that they would have been familiar with. Not a place that they're, the caste society in India is really fucked up. Anyways, Kumkum started asking her family to call her Sunari instead of the name they had given her. Mm-hmm. And her family began taking notes of the statements she would make about her previous life, and they would collect a total of 18. Of the statements, she identified her son's name, the fact that he worked with a hammer, her grandson's name, the name of a town where her father had lived, the location of his home near mango orchards, and the presence of a pond near her house. She also correctly stated that her house had an iron safe in it, a sword hanging near her bed, and that there was a snake near the iron safe that would come out and she would feed milk.
Oh.
Different kind of world in India. You just have a pet snake living in your house
that drinks milk. I don't know. My brother and sister-in-law have snakes. I've never asked them if they give it milk.
Interesting. So her father took these statements to a friend who lived in Darbhanga in the Urdu Bazaar section of the city. And through this contact, they were able to identify a previous person who fit all of the statements she had made. Her name was Sunari Mistry, and she was a blacksmith's wife.
That's quite the name. Sunari Mistry.
Mm-hmm. I'm probably mispronouncing this because it's Indian, but Sunari might be how you say it.
Oh, well, it sounds pretty either way.
I like it both ways. Because of the fucked up caste system, Dr. Verma did not allow his daughter to go visit the family. He didn't want her in the lower class part of the city. It was also said that he seemed kind of almost ashamed that his daughter came from a lower caste, which is pretty fucked up. But anyways, he did go visit and confirmed all of this at one point. It was also said that Kumkum would speak with an accent different from that of her family. And it was associated with how the lower classes would speak. And he also did not like that. They were able to learn that Sonari had died unexpectedly. Kumkum had always told her parents that in her previous life, she had died during an altercation and that her stepson's wife had poisoned her.
Oh.
When the doctor went to visit this area, he was able to confirm that Sonari had in fact died unexpectedly 5 years before Kumkum was born. She had been preparing to be a witness in a trial against her second husband because he had misappropriated money from the estate of her first husband, and then she just suddenly died. So that kind of does fit with a stepchild poisoning her to get the money for her dad. No autopsy was ever performed, so there was no way for them to confirm that that is how she died, but it does seem kind of likely.
Oh, okay.
And now I come to the story that actually inspired me to even do this episode to begin with, because I heard it or read about it, and that's the case of the Pollock twins. It's probably one of the most well-known reincarnation stories out there.
I don't know if I know it.
Jillian and Jennifer Pollock were born in 1958 in a small village called Hexham in England.
Okay.
Their older sisters were Joanna and Jacqueline, and they had been killed tragically when they were struck by a car as they were walking to church.
Oh, so it's them. That's cool.
Yeah, this one's interesting. Those two girls were killed 18 months before Jillian and Jennifer, the twin daughters, were born.
Okay. They weren't done being with their mom and dad. That's
I know.
Sweet.
This one's a really sweet story. When the mother became pregnant again after the death of their two daughters, the father felt, maybe he had a dream, I don't know. He believed that the two girls would be reborn as twins. He made this comment at the time when she was going to the doctor and the doctors were only showing one fetus in the womb.
Okay.
And then she had twins.
Wow.
When the twins were born, the parents noticed two birthmarks on Jennifer. Jennifer was the younger twin, and the two birthmarks matched two marks that were present on Jacqueline, who was the younger of the two sisters that had died.
Okay.
One was a birthmark on her hip and another was on the forehead, which matched an injury that Jacqueline had received when she fell on a bucket and cut her head open as a child.
Oh, wow.
When the twins were 3 years old, they began talking about their older sisters. In particular, their mother overheard them several times discussing details of the accident in which they were killed.
Okay.
In addition, their parents had packed away the toys of the older girls when they were killed, but the two twins found this little cache of toys.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is that Jillian claimed the doll that had belonged to Joanna, which was the older sister, and then Jennifer claimed the one that belonged to Jacqueline.
Okay.
One day when the girls were playing, Jillian pointed to the birthmark on Jennifer's forehead and said, "That's the mark Jennifer got when she fell on a bucket." But Jennifer had not had an accident like that, but Jacqueline had, which I mentioned before.
Right.
When the twins were around age 4, the family returned to the house where they had lived when the older girls were alive. Mm-hmm. And they had not been there before. And as the family was walking along a road nearby, the twins said they wanted to go across to another part of the neighborhood to play on the swings in the park that they loved. They had never been there before and they didn't know that those swings, they said they weren't even visible from where they were walking.
Right.
Their mom also said that they would demonstrate behaviors that were consistent with the older sisters, coming down to even how they held their pencil. The mom brought up the pencil thing because they were 6 years old when they died. She said Jacqueline had been working with a teacher to hold her pencil properly. And like for the life of them, they couldn't get her to correct it. So when this child at 4 is now holding the pencil the same way, it was just one of those things where it's like, this can't just be a coincidence.
Yeah.
There were many other behaviors that she mentions that they just acted same personalities as their older children, and it just moved over to these younger children. I think this is an interesting case because they were reborn into the exact same family in such a short amount of time.
Right.
Some people will try and disprove this one. I've heard it out there because the father believed so strongly in reincarnation and made the comment before they were born, and they're like, the parents just molded these girls into being that way. But it is an interesting one.
It is interesting, and maybe, you know, because they were children and not like grown adults when they died, it's different, and their need to be back with their parents was so strong that that's why it happened.
And they just got pulled right back in.
Yeah.
Or they knew their parents needed them. Mm-hmm. I have saved, I think, one of the most interesting cases for last. This one, I believe, led to a book in 2013. And I feel like I watched a story on this somewhere, but it's the case of Ryan Hammonds, and he was an American boy, and he holds the record for the number of memories of a previous life that he was able to recall. He had 47 statements that he was able to say from his previous life.
And that were confirmed to be true.
Yes. Yeah. There was even more that didn't quite match up. Sometimes, even if they can't confirm them or they seem a little off, it's because it's things that only that person would know. There's only so much you can know from the family members because there's things about us other people just don't know.
Yep, makes sense.
So Ryan Hammonds was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma in 2004 to Protestant Christian parents who did not believe in reincarnation. When he was 4 years old, he started speaking about memories of a previous life. His first comments concerned 3 adopted sons to whom he had given his name. He said he was from Hollywood and pleaded with his mom, Cindy, to take him there so he could see his other family.
Oh.
Ryan said that he had a big house with a swimming pool that was located on a street whose name had Rock in it. He had owned a green car he would allow no one else to drive. He liked to go to the beach with his girlfriends.
Oh.
He had a fascination with sunglasses, and he said that he was often sunburned in his previous life. He also said that he worked for an agency where people changed their names. He would also talk a lot about a Senator 5 who he used to see when he visited New York. He did not like Franklin Roosevelt because he was a Democrat.
Okay.
He had traveled a lot. He had gone to Europe by boat. He had visited Paris, and he had seen the Eiffel Tower. Big stuff.
Yeah, he's done quite a bit. Why is he coming back all quick?
His mom said he was especially inclined to tell his tales at bath time. So while he was taking the bath, he would just start spouting out all these wonderful memories of his previous life. She also said he would sometimes awake screaming from nightmares, but could not remember what they were about. Occasionally, when he got up in the middle of the night, he would complain that his chest hurt and he would gasp for air. In an effort to help him remember more and perhaps learn to whom he was referring, Cindy began to borrow books about Hollywood from her local library. While looking through these books, Ryan recognized Rita Hayworth and Marilyn Monroe. One time she brought home a book that included information about a movie made in 1932 that was called Night After Night. In that book, Ryan spotted a photo of an actor and he said, "That's me."
Oh, shit.
Unfortunately, this man was just an extra in the film.
Okay.
So his name was never used, and the movie credits did not make clear who he was. He was just a side guy.
Okay.
This is when Cindy wrote to Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia because she needed help figuring out what's going on. Tucker was able to look at the many statements that the boy had been making and was convinced to take on this case. He happened to be working on a project and was able to get them extra funding and help to research who this person could be.
Okay.
They also got enough money to fly Ryan and his family out to Los Angeles. They wanted to see if he would recall anything by being in the town that he said he lived in.
Right.
While there and driving through the Hollywood Hills, Ryan recognized a house that he said belonged to one of his friends. They were able to trace this back to a man named Wild Bill Elliott, who had also appeared in Night After Night.
Oh, okay.
They hired a film archivist to try and figure out who this extra guy in the movie could have been, and somehow they were able to trace it down that this man was named Marty Martin.
I used to know someone like that. His name was Ryan.
And when they began researching Martin's life, it just all fit.
Yeah.
So Marty Martin was born as Morris Kalinsky in Philadelphia, and he changed his name later, I guess, when he got into showbiz.
Ah, gotcha.
He had 2 sisters.
Susie, Susanna, and Pamela.
That's funny. He had 2 sisters, and one of them was still alive in New York City. So they had a family member that they could go and talk to. They said that he tap danced on Broadway under the name Marty Kalinsky.
Okay.
And then when he moved to Los Angeles, he changed his name to Marty Martin and was trying to make it big in the movies. But his acting career failed. He ended up opening a talent agency called the Marty Martin Agency.
Oh.
So that made sense with his first statement about an agency where people change their names because actors do that. It was a very successful agency and he became very wealthy. Martin was a staunch Republican who loved Chinese restaurants. He enjoyed the beach and he had an extensive collection of sunglasses. He owned a large house with an outdoor swimming pool on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills, which also fit his statement.
Oh,
rocks. He traveled frequently to New York, and on 4 occasions, he even sailed to Europe on the Queen Mary to visit his sister, who was at the time living in Paris. Martin was married 4 times, but only had 1 daughter of his own. He had 5 stepchildren. He was stricken with leukemia and died in a hospital on Christmas Day of 1964 of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Okay.
By the time that they were finding all of this out about Marty Martin, his mom, Ryan's mom, had collected over 230 items, statements that he had made over the years.
Mm-hmm.
He knew things like what age he died, what his favorite food was, that he was a smoker, that he had many girlfriends and affairs. He never had problem getting the ladies. He liked to watch surfers on the beach. He owned guns. He didn't have a TV when he was a little boy. He also said weird things like you go to a room with numbers on the door before you die, which could have meant his hospital room.
Oh.
He was young, he's like 4 years old saying all of this stuff.
Right.
He also would tell his mom often that he wasn't 5, he was closer to 105.
Oh, okay.
And he would make comments to her about when he was big.
Yeah.
He also told her that he bought his daughter a dog when she turned 6 years old, but she didn't like the dog.
Oh, why?
I don't know. He kept talking about the Senator 5 from New York. He also said he had an African-American maid and gave her name. Many, many details that are just, I can't go through all 47, but he just listed all of these off. One of the most interesting ones comes down to him saying that he was 61 years old when he died.
Okay.
Because Martin's death certificate actually showed his birth date as 1905, which would have made him only 59 when he passed away in 1964. But when they did further research, they found out that it was a mistake and Martin was actually born in 1903. So Ryan saying that he died at age 61 was correct.
Oh,
even more so than the death certificate.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
It's like someone died. Spend a moment to get it
right.
correct.
They brought that up because originally they counted it as saying that Ryan didn't get it correct when he said he died at age 61, because when they first did the research, it showed age 59.
Right.
And then with the further, they were like, okay, this is even more proof this guy knows what he's talking about, or this kid,
this child,
whatever. They were able to track down Martin's daughter, and she was able to corroborate quite a few of the statements he made, including the dog.
Okay.
She said he did buy her a dog, but she ended up I can't remember what kind of dog it was. I don't think I have it written down, but she didn't ever get along with the dog and didn't really like him.
Okay.
So,
maybe he was mean.
maybe he just wasn't cuddly enough, or he was the wrong color. Who knows? In addition to talking about Martin's life, Ryan also commented on what happened when he died. He said there was an awesome light that everyone should go towards, but some people would come back in a new body to live again.
Okay.
He said when he died, he had gone to a waiting place rather than to heaven. He also told his mom, Cindy, that he had seen her from heaven and that he had known her from an earlier life. He had chosen her for his mother so he could take care of her in this life.
Oh.
He recalled being in Cindy's womb and asked her why she had wanted him to be a girl.
Oh.
And in fact, Cindy said she very much wanted to have a girl. He actually told his mom, he said, remember when the doctor did a test and told you I was a boy? You got mad and said he was wrong. Afterwards, you went to a restaurant to eat and you cried for a very long time.
You're like, way to shame me, baby.
She actually said that. She said she regretted her behavior over that. And yeah, of all the things, you have to bring that up. So interestingly enough, Ryan's identity was expressed not only in his memory, but he would portray personality, emotions, and behavior of an old man or an older man.
Like stuck in his ways.
Yeah. They also said he adopted like a more mature tone of voice and acted the part. He probably had I just foresee this 1950s Hollywood guy voice and your little 4-year-olds running around.
Right.
He would hear music from way back when and talk about how that was one of his favorite songs.
No.
He would also begin humming show tunes that his parents didn't know where he would have learned them from. And he asked for tap dancing shoes and just started tap dancing.
Okay.
He would also ask to wear things like suits and ties and black rimmed glasses. He had always told his parents that he hated cats. The reason was that he was scratched badly by a cat when he was in his 20s or 30s, and his daughter was able to corroborate that story as well, that he had tried to help a stray cat and the cat fucked him up and he came home and was like, I fucking hate cats.
That's
so
one experience. Give them a chance.
They also said the first time they took him to a Chinese restaurant, he picked up the chopsticks and just started eating. So that was a weird thing too. They also showed him pictures of people now that they knew that he was potentially Marty Martin, and they took pictures from all in that time. Some that they knew were like his wife or people that were in movies with him. He was able to correctly identify people that Marty would have known even when he didn't exactly know who they were. Like he pointed to Martin's fourth wife and said, I know this girl, but he didn't know specifically that it was his wife. But then they would show him pictures of other girls and be like, I don't know any of them.
Oh,
pretty interesting.
Well, fourth wife, which means a lot of girls. So maybe he didn't care to remember their names.
He did say he had a lot of girlfriends that he took to the beach.
Yep.
Of all the cases that Jem and Ian studied, this was the one with the most evidence that matched.
Right.
This continued until Ryan hit the age of 9. One day, his mom walked into his room and she found that he had removed all of his decorations that had been related to Martin, even his Eiffel Tower and pictures of New York. And he told his mom at that time he was ready to just be a regular kid.
Oh, okay.
But she said the influence of Martin's personality persisted even as he got into his teenage years. He still loved 1950s music and he wanted to go to New York. He continued to be fascinated with sunglasses and liked to wear button-down dress shirts.
Yeah, I kind of had a feeling the sunglasses were going to prevail.
He did change his mind about cats.
Good.
He didn't hate them anymore.
Good.
I had to throw that in there.
Did he tap dance?
No,
Okay.
never tap danced. There was one thing that is interesting about this case as well, and a lot of people tried to discount it, is that it was proven, I guess, later in life that Ryan was actually a psychic. He had psychic abilities, and some people try to discount this and say that it wasn't actually a case of reincarnation, but instead that he was tapping into a spirit. That is one thing you'll see if you come across this case. Like I said, it's one of the most famous ones. So
gotcha.
For those who try to say it was a hoax concocted by his parents for publicity or financial gain, they said there's no way, there was nothing out there that they could have found about this Marty Martin guy to have put this together. There were several other cases. There was another case of a child who claimed to be the writer of the screenplay for Gone with the Wind.
Oh.
From the 1930s. That was a crazy one.
Yeah.
There was the one I already mentioned earlier about the famous golfer. So there are famous ones, but every time that they went to visit, it's like there's no way that they would have known some of this information, even if they're famous people. The details they're giving are not out there for you to just find on the internet.
Let alone the fact that he's 2 or 3.
That's where I get to. I'm like, these kids can't come up with some of this stuff.
Kids can repeat what their parents say, but even at that age, I don't know. You would have to have complete control over that child.
Even if you coached your child to say something, when your parents are coming over, you're like, don't say this word or whatever, or you know, be on your best behavior. They're not gonna.
Well,
at that age,
my child would go, my mom told me not to tell you this.
Exactly. That's what I think too.
Well, and they're being interviewed, obviously.
By multiple people. Yeah. For them to keep coming up with that. They do mention in doing their research that some of the children would be really shy to talk about it because they felt like it wasn't
private.
Yes. And that they would have to earn the children's trust. So many times Ian and Jem, when they were going in to meet with children, they would not even mention the past lives at first. They would build a reputation with the kids first. And then, I mean, they were psychiatrists. They were trained. They knew how to talk to children. So yeah, I also think they've probably heard plenty of tall tales coming from children over the years, and they would know how to distinguish between the two. Yeah. So those are my stories and what I could gather when thinking about reincarnation. I can tell you that Jem Tucker has a really good, concise learnings from what he took away after all of the reincarnation studies that he did. And he was just like, I am fully convinced that there is more consciousness than we know, and it's separate from the body. And we're all part of, he believes we're all part of one big consciousness, and talks about how if we would all just understand that, would we treat each other better, realize that we're all part of the one energy.
I think the only way for someone to truly, truly believe that and act a certain way, if you aren't inherently good, is to have an NDE.
True.
You would need proof.
Yeah. And there's no way to definitively prove, even with all of these stories that seem to me like really good proof, there's going to be skeptics that are going to find some reason to say no.
The psychic thing threw me, and birthmarks can be coincidence.
I mean, everything can be coincidence, but
nothing is a coincidence.
When you take the birthmarks combined with the statements they're making and it matches a person that they're able to trace it, like there's too many coincidences for that to just be a coincidence at that point.
That's the point. It's like you're just trying to find excuses for it not to be the truth.
And when they did these studies, they wouldn't even talk to these people unless they met certain criteria. So I feel like they did the work for us. And there are 3,000 cases that they documented, and they're continuing to do this work today. Jim is still out there. He's still leading this at the University of Virginia. So there will be even more. Yeah. And I'm sure someone will take over after he retires, and so on and so on. I did want to share one of his speculations as well, is that he believes everyone does reincarnate, and all of us are a reincarnated soul. And although we may not remember our past life, we are carrying over things from those past lives. And that could be what explains our different personalities, our different temperaments, the way that children are just who they are from a young age, and can be so different maybe than the environment that they're born into.
Makes a lot of sense.
Makes a ton of sense. Like somebody born into small town, I don't know, Nebraska, has these big dreams or wants to be a tap dancer in New York or whatever. Like, where did that come from? Because that is not a product of their environment. And it explains so much that we see, especially when looking at children.
Absolutely.
So I believe in reincarnation. I believe that there is probably an afterlife as well. I believe, I guess, kind of like Hinduism, where you can choose different realms, you can stay in heaven. I thought it was really enlightening to hear from these children that were saying they had past lives. Almost all of them talked about what they did in between their death and being reborn. Right. That means there is some kind of conscious knowing after we die, which fits with the NDEs. Right. I don't know. It all just gives me warm, fuzzy feelings that no matter how shitty things are going down here right now, especially in America, that there could be good things after. I don't know where we're going to be reborn, though, if the earth is destroyed. So
maybe there are other planets.
Or maybe we stay in the heaven, hell realm or whatever.
Maybe just not in this galaxy, but, we can go into other Earth-like beings.
I thought it was interesting. I can't remember which case it was where they said there were different levels.
Well, that's what the Mormons believe in. We covered that.
That's true. So it's all just coming together.
Yeah, it's just all a mixture of a bunch of different beliefs.
And I don't think one of them has it all right. No. I think it's pieces of each. Yeah. And if we put them all together, that's probably the real story.
Very interesting. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on reincarnation, everyone?
Do you believe in karma? Doing good things here so that you have a better next life. And as I think about my own personal self and dying, I would like to think that I would remember or know what's coming in the future. Like if I reincarnate, I want to still know
yourself.
Yeah. I think that's the hard part for me with reincarnation, is that the self is completely lost, which is what Buddha says. You are just back into the pool of consciousness.
Right. I know.
Which if we think about before birth, none of us remember.
I know.
And these kids forget as soon as they turn a certain age.
It is sad because you're expecting that, your family's up there waiting for you or something. Well, maybe there is, because as I also understand the soul is I'm not the entire soul. I am but a piece of it. Of my soul, right? They say that the soul that's down here is just a sliver. That's why you can renew your soul down here. Let's say you've had a really hard time. You can meditate so that you can actually have contact with your higher self, right? And that's what they talk about. That higher self, that they can send you a bit of the uncorrupted soul down to you to replenish you.
Oh, I like that idea.
I think that part of whoever you're looking for is always going to be where you need it to be. I understand what you're saying is that I want to remember who I am. That's sad. I'm just this layer upon layer upon layer of experiences rather than being specific and being I remember when I was Kendra.
Right. Or what's the whole point of having this, hopefully, 80 something years?
Your higher self knows the point.
Yeah.
This is just experiences. And once we're back up there, once we're back to being with our higher self or whatever, we know why we do this. True. And we know why we like going back down to do it, even though it's difficult down here.
Yeah.
And there's Trumps. Just kidding.
That means he has a higher consciousness too.
Yeah. When he goes back, that one's going to slap him around.
Or maybe that's what they're doing. They're like, let's go cause some havoc down on Earth.
We all have a purpose, right?
I liked where the kids said that they chose their parents too.
Mm-hmm.
Like they watched and decided what family they wanted to go to.
That's what I've always grown up with believing, again, with the Mormon religion, is that you choose.
Yeah.
You know what you're about to deal with, and that's why you choose whatever situation you're about to go into. So even though we're sad and we're dealing with all this, our soul, our higher self, chose this path for us.
And they're happy to be experiencing it.
And then that's where we deal with our karma, though. It's like, hey, this life right here is going to give you the same shit you were supposed to take care of last time and you didn't. So you're going to redo it.
You just keep going back until you learn your lessons and decide suffering and pain is over. And then you become a god or go to nirvana. I don't quite understand nirvana because I think that means that you no longer have any self. Like you're just light and love.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I want to aspire to that.
I would rather like to be like sitting in heaven and be like, you know what, Joanne? I feel like being a butterfly today.
Right.
I'll see you later.
Yeah, I don't like the idea that we can't come back as animals because that's like my plan for my next life.
I know. What about the insects that last a day? It's a short trip.
Well, they're just like evolving. And so their next trip is to become a rodent that lives for a month.
Oh, so maybe it's based on how long something lives. So, but then that would mean that a tree is probably the highest order.
Well, the Celtic Druids believe that.
I just don't want there to be rigid rules.
Me neither.
I want it to just flow.
I want to evolve into another type of being than a human. Hopefully that's in my
Who can swim? I want
future.
Gills. Just kidding.
Live in the city of Atlantis. Be a mermaid. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. We would love to hear any stories that you have of reincarnation or even near-death experiences. I'll bring that back up for next lab reports. We always like hearing those kinds of stories.
I liked this episode.
Yeah, it was a nice change of pace.
Thank you for finally doing it.
I have put it off a few times.
You almost didn't do it this time either.
And then I told myself, just fucking do it, Kendra. Just narrow it down. That's the problem, is there's just so much information. Right. I'm like, how do I narrow this down and make it less than 3 hours? Because we do not need any more two-parters.
Well, that's what's next. So
I was about to say, because Jessica's got one coming up that we're recording next week. So we're getting ready for that. While you're waiting for that episode next Tuesday, you can visit us on our social media. We are on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, all at Lucid Lab Podcast, one word. We have not been the greatest at posting lately because a lot's been going on in life, but we will try to get better.
Yeah, we're bad.
We're real bad.
We really just need someone to help us with socials.
Yeah, if somebody is out there that listens to the show and enjoys it and you're good at social media, send us an email on some ideas.
Yeah.
We'd love it.
I think it just takes a while to do some of that. We want to do the content. I don't know. That's just not our forte.
But we know it's important to grow our business. Important.
And we've also had some topics that were a little bit more difficult to put videos together on. So that's
true.
Why. Anyway, if you have any lab reports, mini episodes, or regular episode suggestions, please send those to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com. You can also mail us something at P.O. Box 251 East Lake, Colorado 80614. What would you rather be? A potato, a butterfly, a turtle, a human being, or a tree?
Something to think about.
We'll leave you and your thoughts. That's what we'll do.
And on that note, in the meantime,
stay lucid.
Bye.